Okay, it's 12 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Dr. Brandon Lundell, and I'm glad everyone can join us today. We've got a good crowd. And we're talking today about the invisible enemy, a very important topic in today's world. Something that we're all familiar with, but we can always use more information and more of a refresher to help us in our own lives and in our own strategies of avoiding and mitigating the effects of our everyday chemicals, but also for our patients as well. So this is a very important section, and I'm very glad to be speaking about it today. And we're going to talk about toxic pollutants' effect on the cardiovascular and metabolic, neurologic, multi-system effects of toxins. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in. If we have time, we have a lot of information to go over today, as always. That's what makes these webinars fun. But if you have some questions, type them in, and if we have time at the end, I'll try to get to as many as I can. And yes, this webinar will be recorded. And I just always want to make sure everyone can see the screen and hear me okay. If someone wants to type in into the question box or even the chat box, if they can see okay, just so I make sure that not half the screen isn't showing. So go ahead and type in if you can see the screen and hear me okay. Everybody hear me okay? So type into the, yep, okay, good. Audio and visual is good. So, all right, I always just want to make sure. Technology. So we'll get started. Standard disclaimer, statements made in this presentation have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, so you're responsible for this information. It's for your education and information purposes only, not trying to diagnose or treat any disease. So my objectives today, like I said, I want to increase our understanding of the multi-systemic effects of everyday pollutants. I've been doing this for a long time, as most of you have, many of you have, and I am still amazed on a daily basis what we're exposed to, how hidden it is, just what a health threat it is. So I am constantly being reminded of that. I want everybody to also just have practical everyday tips to live a more toxin-less life. The idea isn't to be completely free of toxins. The idea that's impossible in this day and age. But how do we have practical tips to avoid it? And again, I'm just amazed on a daily basis just how many different chemicals we're exposed to in places we wouldn't even think. So, and I'll get to some of those. And I do believe new information helps us inform ourselves and our patients of the importance of avoidance and detoxification strategies. There's more and more information coming out on a daily basis of just how unregulated, unstudied, and potentially harmful that these are. So we're gonna as much scientific research that we have, the better for our own lives and for our patients. We'll also go over some labs, just simple ways of detecting when somebody might have a toxic burden and toxic overload. And we'll go over some nutritional and lifestyle strategies that really do work. I use them in my daily life, and I encourage everyone else to. I have my patients and hopefully all of my students as well. Understanding the principles of detoxification. Chemicals are ubiquitous and they're everywhere. We can't avoid them all, but we can avoid a great number of them and in a great quantity. I've always said this: just because we can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, hear it, feel it, doesn't mean they don't exist. And that's what makes them so particularly dangerous, is that we don't feel them. We don't know where they are, and we can't always detect them. Labeling laws and testing laws are archaic. So We want to understand the immunologic and neurologic and cardiovascular, not just the carcinogenic, which is heretofore the only really testing that most chemicals undergo, but the endocrine disrupting is still, it's tested, but it's not regulated. So the amount of scientific information on the endocrine disrupting and immunologic and neurologic and uh, all the damaging effects, it's amazing that these things are still in our lives. We want to apply science-based, evidence-based therapeutic interventions and educate our patients as well. Again, the goal is not complete eradication; that would be impossible. And the other thing about this lecture is this isn't meant to be a downer, but we do have to go over just some hard facts. Where the chemicals are, the fact that they're everywhere. But this ultimately is a very encouraging, not discouraging section, talk because we do have powerful ways of dealing with this stuff, and it works. We just need to know it and know where the sources are, try to remove it, and understand that this is an absolute priority. Look, I've been practiced for 15 years, studying this stuff for 20 or more years, and I still sometimes, there's so many things to go over with a patient, right? They come in and you're dealing with insulin resistance, you're dealing with leaky gut, you're dealing with GI problems, psychological problems, and there's so much low-hanging fruit that we, no pun intended, but there, to deal with diet and exercise and just basic supplements and trying to get their, genetics, optimized, epigenetics optimized. So this often gets missed, and I'm guilty of it too sometimes. But the more I practice, and I talked to a lot of people who've been practicing a long time as well in the functional medicine and nutritional medicine field, and they kind of say the same thing, that the more they study, the more they work with patients, the more they realize just how primary this has to be in our awareness. And it's certainly not something that you want to start your patients off with some major detox, but you have to educate them from day one on where the sources are and how it's affecting them, and the importance of making those hard choices sometimes to, go to a health food store and choose better foods and choose better beauty products and, buy a, water filter and, doing things that aren't as convenient in our lives, but it's a inverse relationship between convenience and health sometimes, right? So sometimes the more convenient something is, the less healthy it is, and that's just the world we live in. I've always said this too, that the tobacco industry has actually makes the food industry look like a bunch of Boy Scouts, right? I mean, what's put in the food and how toxic it is and how addictive it is and how engineered it is, not just genetically, but how it's engineered to make us fat and make us addicted, because fat people eat more and addicted people eat more. So the tobacco industry, which has been, rightly criticized and brought to task, is really nothing compared to what the food industry is doing. I mean, we chided the tobacco industry for going after our kids, and look at what the food industry is doing. It's absolutely criminal and completely unregulated and covered up because, hey, people still have to eat. And as the CEO of Pepsi said once, these are beverages that have no health effect whatsoever and are just simply there to enhance our life and well-being. And that was the head of Pepsi when asked if there was a link between sugary drinks and obesity. I don't know. Is there a link between jumping into a lake and getting wet? Maybe that's up for debate. I don't know. And I have this in my office too. I have a plan to help you on your prescription costs. Take a sip of this tap water. There are plenty of drugs in it. And again, just because we can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, hear it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I live up here outside of in Boulder County, and pretty healthy place, pretty pristine place. And some of the landmark studies in the late 90s, early 2000s about pharmaceuticals in our water was actually done right outside of Boulder. The fish in the Boulder Creek were starting to develop agenitalia, and also, both male and female genitalia. And it was due to all the estrogens and drugs in it. And look, it's only gotten worse. There is no way to remove those from our water supply. They're the technology doesn't exist, at least that's feasible. In money, it would take billions of dollars per community, really, to remove some of these stuff, because distillation is about the only thing that would. And so this is a front door reminder. It's right outside my front door. Just how ubiquitous these chemicals are, and in places you just don't even know. So I've mentioned this before in some of my lectures, but it's worth repeating. In my outside of my office, and in my hometown, we have beautiful trees here, and a good 20% of our trees are emerald, this ash, emerald ash, or ash trees, and this ash borer has been brought over from China, several years ago. It's decimated ash trees throughout the Midwest, and it's now made it to Colorado, the Front Range here of Colorado. And I've got probably one of the biggest, most beautiful ash trees, a 100-year-old ash tree outside of my office. And it's in the city of right-of-way, so I don't have a lot of say of because the city owns the tree. And what they've decided to do is, in their infinite wisdom, and look, they're good-hearted people, but they don't have a clue of what they're doing. They've decided to inject most of the prime trees, the trees worth saving, the shade trees and the older trees. They inject it with an ash borer, an insecticide. I study insecticides. The insecticides they are using causes autism, it causes leukemia, it causes tremendous amount of neurological and developmental problems. And so here I am. I have this healthy office, and they're injecting the tree, and the studies show that it stays in the leaves. And so, I used to have, myself and my staff, rake the leaves every fall. I'm not going to do that anymore. I have to hire someone to do that, because the toxins are in the leaves, and they will be there for at least 3 years, and it's measurable amounts. And so if you go to this link here, you can read about the ash trees. But why is our response, like so many other problems, just throw chemicals at it without really looking at long-term consequences? So I talked to the Longmont city manager, and he was somewhat open. I sent him some of the studies. I sent him about a dozen studies on how this affects our mitochondria, how it uncouples our proteins, how it causes ribosomal destruction, DNA damage. I mean, this is real, and they're not just insect studies and mammal studies. These are human studies as well, human cell line studies. And he was open, he was nice about it, but it doesn't make a difference. They just continue to do it, and we all have to live with it. So this is why it's so important to where we do have a choice, and where we do have the ability to limit our exposure or decrease our exposure, we have to do it, because like this, sometimes we don't have the choice. Again, we can understand that, okay, it's in the leaves now, and we can avoid that as much as possible, so we can still mitigate it. But this is happening in your town. I guarantee it. Spraying for pesticide, spraying for noxious weeds, spraying for mosquitoes. These are the decisions that every city and town in America makes without any regard to the long-term health consequences. And really, how did we get here? How did we, use chemicals now and ask questions later attitude? It should be the exact opposite. Well, it should be, the definition of a failed public policy is to wait until the science has shown that there are devastating consequences. It should be the other way around. It should be the principle of prevention, where, look, before we use it, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's safe. Then we'll use it. But it's the exact opposite. We have to prove, the burden of proof is on us to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this stuff is harmful. And the reason is, we all know, it's money. These chemical laws were made in the 30s and have not changed for the good. They've changed pretty much for the worse, despite what some people might say in the corporate industry of whining just how all the regulations. Well, it's still pretty ineffective when it comes to health. So the amamectin benzoate is what they're using. It's an ivermectin insecticide. It's used extensively in pest control. So this isn't just emerald ash. This is a lot of food. A lot of farmers use this on vegetables and corn. And amamectin results in a significant decrease in body weight, body weight gain, red blood cell count, hemoglobin concentration, mean corpuscular volume. So it causes hematological and morphological problems, significantly decrease leukocyte, lymphocyte, platelet counts, increase granulocyte counts, which increases allergies to other foods. So you get exposed to some toxins. And this is what's interesting about these insecticides and pesticides is a lot of people think they're allergic to certain foods, but they're really just allergic to the pesticide residue that's in those foods, which unfortunately makes them then more susceptible to their body cross reacts then with the pesticide and then that associated food protein. So it's how you can develop food sensitivities, but it's the pesticide that often initiates it. So it increases tumor necrosis factor alpha, it decreases your immunoglobulin, so decreased immune system, increased cancers, and these are at small amounts. 2.5 milligrams per kilogram. I mean, 0.5 mils. These are amounts that can actually easily be achieved on a daily basis. Again, the cytotoxic potential of 13 commonly used agricultural insecticides, and again, amamectin benzoate possess the strongest cytotoxic potential in the dose-dependent fashion. I mean, so it destroys the mitochondria. These are, and also pyrethroids, which are used often to kill flies and mosquitoes. So this is something that we're all exposed to on a daily basis. Again, Boulder County here, we think it's pretty healthy. Every week, all summer long, they spray throughout the county. They still spray. I mean, this is 1950s technology. They spray the air with harmful chemicals, these harmful chemicals, and they do it. We've complained, and so they do it. A group of us have really complained and been outspoken, and so they do it at night, and they try to do it without people seeing, but they still do it. Again, it's they've all been shown to have cytotoxic and properties. And again, when we're talking about kids and pregnant moms being exposed to this on a daily basis, it's even more important because these cells are dividing and they're growing so quickly that they're more susceptible to any damage, any cytotoxicity, any damage to the DNA and RNA. So again, moms and families, kids who are at reproductive age, walking through the city park, after they put down the fertilizer. I mean, your neighbor uses glyphosate, right? Roundup and atrazine and all these things that you don't even know about. So it really is important that you start being aware of these things and making simple choices. Well, maybe I'm not going to go lay on the grass. Maybe I'm going to put something down before I go lay on public grass, because most and golf courses are probably one of the worst. Not wearing your shoes and clothes into the house after you've been to the golf course. I mean, these little things are really important. Again, emamectin benzoate causes an increased level of caspase, which is a very potent inflammatory and cell damaging molecule that we have, similar to NF-kappa B. In this study, there was a statistically significant increase in all hepatic biomarkers, AST and ALT, GGT, even blood sugar. So it's an obesogen as well in the emamectin benzoate treated group, and so it's also hepatotoxic. But interestingly, in this study, I'm not the only one doing this. I mean, there's a lot of people looking at this stuff, and just by pre-treating the liver with vitamin C. So having nutrients available in your body that are antioxidant is extremely important. This is why we take supplements. This is why we eat well, because if we have enough antioxidants and vitamin C and B12 and folate, and we have our methylation, then we can handle some of these better. That's why it's so important that we do that. So when people ask me, why do I take 100 supplements a day? I take 100, 70, 75 individual, tablets and pills every day. I mean, and it's easy to get there when you look at multivitamin and fish oils and anti-inflammatories and curcumin and minerals and probiotics and green tea and N-acetylcysteine and methylation support. It's very, adrenal support. It's very easy to get to that, but it's absolutely necessary, in my opinion, in my experience. The association between non-Hodgkin lymphoma and organophosphate pesticides, again, a meta-analysis, proves the link that they're very aminotoxic. Organophosphate pesticides are ubiquitous, and many studies, again, we only have a limited time here. This really is a 12-hour lecture, should be anyway, but I wanted to just increase the awareness as much as possible here and there, and organophosphate pesticides, people who live near farms have greater autistic rates, greater Parkinson's rates, greater cardiovascular rates, independent of diet and BMI and all that stuff. It's just the closer you live and the more you're exposed to these things. I mean, the science is robust. The science is pretty clear. And that's what I want to share with you a little bit today. We're not going to change the system fighting City Hall. We have to make the change in our own lives and spread that out and be the champion of this in our own practices. And that's how we make the change, is really just increasing the awareness as much as possible. Developmental neurotoxicity, again, a huge area of study with these organophosphates. And again, these are used, people ask me all the time, I mean, well, is eating organic really important? It's not even a question. You have to choose organic, and, it doesn't have to be perfect. Most of the studies that I've seen kind of have a cutoff at about 75%. If 75% of your diet is organic, then you're in the lowest quintile of toxin exposure and residue in your system. So, it doesn't have to be perfect, but, is it worth a few extra dollars? I mean, how is that even a question? How, I know somebody who just had leukemia, and her treatments through the course, which unfortunately didn't even work for her, her treatments were over $1 million, and sure, insurance pays for some of that, but I mean, what's it worth not to spend the last 6 months of your life in a hospital, 20, 30, 40 years before your time? So, these also really disrupt the cholinergic mechanisms. That's where these are cholinergic. So that's how it affects the brain. That's how it affects neurotransmitters. That's how it affects the memory. That's how it affects, peripheral nerves, and neurotoxicity is a lot through the cholinergic mechanisms. It interrupts the acetylcholine. It increases the acetylcholine activity, acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, essentially, and so. And that's right here, irreversible inhibition of the acetylcholine esterases. So So it just essentially causes the nerve cell to die because of overstimulation. So again, chemicals are part of our everyday lives. I'm not trying to, again, remember what I said. It can be a little bit, um, you know, not the happiest of things, but we have to not bury our sand. We have to look at this so that we can make wise choices. But we can't avoid them, and that's okay. I've helped people build houses, and builders don't get it. I've talked to builders and subcontractors, and when we choose, you know, particle board, or you can get no formaldehyde particle board. And I actually had a drywaller say, "Oh well, that's all a bunch of crap because you drink a glass of wine and you get formaldehyde, and you're driving your car, you get formaldehyde." And my response to that is, one, exactly. That's why, if we can mitigate it, it's so important. And also, two, the idea isn't complete eradication. So people in their brains think, well, if I'm going to get exposed to a little, and this is an unconscious thought, if I'm going to get exposed to a little, what's the point? Why should I, try to avoid it? And that's the exact wrong approach. Because we get exposed to so much and we can't avoid it, it is more imperative that we raise our awareness and strategies of mitigating that. So, and gosh, talk about new homes. All the new homes built in the last 10 years, all the piping is plastic. I mean, I see, I see. I don't think it'd be possible, but I counsel all my patients, if they're remodeling, to still do copper. Look, there's problems with copper too, but so much easier to deal with than the plastic. I mean, when we test water from a new home, there are shards of plastic in the water. I mean, and the number one complaint is plastic tasting water. So yeah, it's a lot more to use copper because of the prices, but it's absolutely worth it in my opinion. So yeah, that flawed argument is, oh, it's such a very small amount, is not an accurate assessment too. I mean, it ignores the accumulation and biostorage of these things, the fact that when we get exposed to them from the womb on, we store them in our systems. And it's kind of the death by a thousand cuts, if you will. Sure, a little bit here, a little bit here, there isn't that big of a deal, but it's the hundreds and thousands that we get exposed to every day. So um, I don't, toxin safety, you can read this. This will be posted on the NutriWest website, usually in about a week. Also, I will have it available through my office as a recording as well. And this is actually part of my functional medicine series that I've recorded. It's a 50-hour course that I've recorded and is available. And this is part of it as well. But the main problem with toxin safety, quote, safety testing, is that it's based on the LD50 and it's based on observable effects in the lab, and it's looking for cancers, rashes, lung irritation. It's looking for acute effects, not the long-term, developmental, neurodevelopmental, endocrine, autoimmune, cardiovascular. It's very difficult to test, but there is a large body of research out there now, and today we're going to go over some of it. So, and again, there's almost zero testing for the synergistic accumulation. So toxin A plus toxin B does not equal C. Toxin A plus toxin B, the effect of that is 100, sometimes 1,000 times more potent than any one of those by themselves, and that's a huge, very new body of research as well coming out. Well, how does A plus B? We know what A does a little, we know what B does a little, but when we combine A and B, and a lot of that is true for heavy metals. How do heavy metals react with these chemicals and toxins? And not good, usually. It's not, they don't cancel each other out, they egg each other on. So we have an infinite degree of compounds that can be combined and are in our system, and you can see how if you have on your metabolic processes and enzymes, if you have 1,000 chemicals affecting each slightly different enzyme in your detoxification, in your neurological system, you can see how it quickly builds up and causes a huge dam. I use this, a toxin exposure questionnaire. It's part of my intake, and just we're all exposed to automobile exhaust, but people who commute have much higher amounts of benzene and xylenes in their system, much higher amounts. Are you around radio towers and EMFs? That's a huge source. We won't get to that today, but EMFs are a huge source of toxins as well. And again, just paints, and it's amazing how many people are remodeling their homes. The economy's good, they're remodeling their homes and buying new homes or building new homes, and just how clueless people are with the toxins that go into a house in this day and age. It is worse and worse and worse. And honestly, low VOC doesn't really mean anything. Yeah, it's better than high VOC for sure, but low VOC and quote unquote green building products really don't mean anything. Green means, okay, it might be better for the environment, but it does not necessarily mean it's better for you. There's a website called Green Design Center. And Andy and a couple of other people are over there. You can tell him I sent you. But they've been researching healthy building products, not just green, but healthy building products for 20 years. And so that's a great resource, greendesignCenter.com. And tell them I sent you. And they give good discounts on all kinds of building materials. And the Environmental Working Group also has some good lists as well. So there's a lot of resources out there. So having a questionnaire can be helpful. Do you have any root canals and all the fillings? Do you have those? It's on my questionnaire, I also have, what do you use for your toothpaste? What do you use for, your beauty products? That is, deodorant, lotions. I mean, we've said this before, that the old saying is, don't put anything on your skin that you wouldn't eat, right? Because if you eat it, at least it goes through the liver, first pass effect, and the phase 3 in the gut. But when you put it on your skin, it's essentially a free pass into your brain, into your blood. Most of these chemicals do pass the blood-brain barrier quite readily. That's what makes them so dangerous. So again, people think that they're putting on their Jergens dry skin lotion, and how beautiful it makes their skin look, and they're killing themselves. So we'll get to some of that with the phthalates and parabens as well. So some of the things that I look for on my basic standard lab test when I order that for my new patients, if you have elevated or low white blood cells, again, everyone thinks of infection, but these toxins do the same thing. I just showed you some studies how it lowers white blood cells. And so low white blood cell, don't just automatically think, oh, it's Epstein-Barr, it's Lyme disease. I mean, yeah, it could be that. But again, that's the synergistic effect of that. Well, what is somebody with a methylation defect and Epstein-Barr and exposed to tiny amounts of these chemicals? I mean, you're talking about a massive, perfect storm there. So elevated or low white blood cells, elevated if it's more of an acute exposure, but low chronic exposure. We've talked about the hematological problems with some of these chemicals. It can cause low and high MCV, elevated RDW sometimes, not associated with anemia. Uric acid, low uric acid is sometimes more problematic because that can mean low molybdenum. It can mean a molybdenum deficiency, and molybdenum is essential in phase 2 detoxification. So, and elevated uric acid can mean that their liver is impaired or their kidneys are impaired. So keeping the excretion going is extremely important. Remember the old saying, the solution for pollution is dilution. And if we're not drinking enough water and our kidneys aren't flushing out properly, then that's a huge bioaccumulation issue. And again, uric acid is a toxic compound in and of itself, but it's showing impaired impaired excretion by the kidneys, but these heavy metals and these toxins and these phthalates and pesticides and plasticizers and heavy metals, they really do damage the kidney. It's one of the main causes of high blood pressure is toxic overload. And of course the drugs, not to mention just the drugs and medications that people are taking. All of the thousands and thousands of tons of Advil that people are dumping into their systems every year. It's impairing our ability to detoxify. Elevated or lowered cholesterol. So low cholesterol can mean liver damage, and elevated cholesterol also liver damage due to toxicities, especially if the LDL tends to be really high. Now, an HDL in the hundreds is also a sign of toxicity as well. Elevated triglycerides, we'll talk about the metabolic effects a little bit later. BUN, creatinine, elevated bilirubin means that they also may have an impaired ability in their hepatobiliary system, so they don't detoxify. And this is a mechanical, not a biochemical problem, but it affects the biochemistry because the bile is not produced very well, and it's not excreted very well. So bile is where a significant amount of our toxins are excreted. So Gilbert's was previously thought to be harmless. It's not harmless. You shouldn't have bilirubin in your blood in that, because what is bilirubin? Bilirubin is a carrier for toxins and heavy metals. So low vitamin D. Also, I should put high vitamin D on here because yes, vitamin D is toxic at high amounts and it increases all-cause mortality. That's another story. Don't want to open up that Pandora's box, but the literature is very clear. And again, listen to my lectures if you want more on this, but optimal long-term levels in American units, nanomoles per liter should be around 45 to 50. Doesn't mean you can't go up a little bit short term, but these people who are self-medicating, and maybe you've told your patients to take 5,000 IUs a day indefinitely, that's not healthy. The epidemiological studies are very clear that increases the all-cause mortality. So the lowest all-cause mortality as it relates to vitamin D is right around that 40, 45. So just the messenger. Don't shoot me. But that is what the science is very clear on. Obviously elevated or low liver enzymes. People forget that liver enzymes below 10 is not good, because that means you don't have enough of those enzymes to actually detoxify. These are essential enzymes to detoxify. Yes, they're increased if the cells are destroyed in the liver, but if they're low, these are B6 dependent enzymes, so it means that you don't have enough B vitamins to even mount a phase 1 and phase 2 defense. Elevated GGT and again, low GGT. Hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, we'll talk about the thyroid disrupting chemicals. Any perturbations in calcium can be a sign of toxicity. Obviously, these can be a sign of many different things, but what I want to just raise your awareness is that the fact that these things can be signs of toxicity. So be thinking of that when you see some of these. Elevated or lower homocysteine. Remember, low homocysteine is not good either. I think LabCorp should be sued. I mean, I use LabCorp all the time, but when it comes, they're great lab, but when it comes to their reference ranges, their reference range for homocysteine is 0 to 15. All right, look, anything close to 0, you're dead. And at 15, you're going to be dead. So pretty quickly. There's zero scientific basis for 0 to 15. The only reason they do that is because there's no drug. If there was a drug that would lower homocysteine, everybody's level would be 8, and everyone would need that drug. So, but yeah, 8 is about optimal, give or take. So elevated, and so if you have a homocysteine of 3 or 4, remember homocysteine is a byproduct of SAMe. So a homocysteine of 3 or 4 means you probably have a methylation defect as well, and you're not maybe eating enough protein, or you're just not getting enough methyl nutrients in your diet to make enough SAMe. So So then that means your glutathione is low and your phase 2 detoxification is low and you're a pathologic detoxifier, as we say. So these things are it's amazing the information we can get from a simple blood test. Obviously, your inflammatory markers here, iron can be an acute phase reactant. If it's elevated, if it's low, it's often a sign of leaky gut and nutrient deficiencies, low platelets. So that's just on your basic blood test. And obviously what I didn't put here is your autoimmune markers as well. We'll talk a little bit later about autoimmune. I have a great autoimmune lecture. It's part of my functional medicine series, and I'll be teaching that in a couple weeks in Dallas. So if you're in the area, it's one of my favorite lectures. It's information packed. It's been 5 years in the making, or really 10 years in the making. So hopefully you can make that. Some other tests that we use, doctor's data has the heavy metal, urinary nutrient, and toxic elements. I'm a fan of urinary and not hair analysis. Hair analysis is okay, but there are inherent flaws, and urinary, especially the challenge urinary testing, which I'll get to a little bit later, has been shown to be more accurate for body burden. And look, there's hair analysis is okay. It's not that it's bad. There's some good things you can get from it, but there's also too many potentials for errors in hair analysis. So it won't show acute toxicity sometimes. It's influenced by the environment and shampoos and everything else, and hair breaks down over time, and so everybody has a different rate of sequestering. So we use urinary, and most functional medicine practitioners use urinary as the gold standard, and it is considered the gold standard. You can do a direct toxin test as well. So you can test for 50 different toxins, the phthalates and the parabens and the pesticides and the plastics. US Biotech has a good one. Genova has a good one, in Great Plains. Great Plains is the only one I know that tests directly for glyphosate. So, and that's really important, especially since Monsanto and now Bayer owns Monsanto. So now Bayer is starting to, I think a judge in California found Monsanto culpable for somebody's leukemia that they developed, and they found, and studies are showing, when they look at commercial cereals, they find measurable amounts of glyphosate. And of course, Bayer's response is, well, it's below the EPA levels. The thing about EPA levels that we have to understand is EPA levels really are not studied for their toxic effects. EPA levels, most people don't know this, but if you go to the EPA website and do some digging, it is there. And it's in a couple of books I'll refer you to, but it's population based. It's simply what's in the environment. And yes, there are some, when the evidence is overwhelming, they'll start to, taper it down a little bit. But EPA levels are nowhere near safe levels, just like RDA levels are nowhere near optimal levels. So don't be fooled into, well below EPA levels. That's absolutely irrelevant when it comes to long-term health, because again, EPA does not study long-term effects. They just don't. So you can do your blood and urine amino acids to check for your detoxification, and looking at your glycine and ammonia byproducts, looking at how your and amino acids are very important for detoxification. You can do mercapturic and D-glyceric acids to look at your phase 1 and phase 2. That doctor's data has that test. You can look at urine estrogen metabolites, like through ZRT. Those are great tests to see how your phase 1 and phase 2 enzymes. Of course, your SNP testing can look at the potential for nutrient need. And I've said this before, but I'll just briefly mention that, SNP testing is in its infancy. Be very, very careful. I think the absolute wrong way, I've said this before, the wrong way of using SNP testing is to run a SNP test and to base a supplement regimen on SNP testing. The most of what we know SNP testing is good for scientifically, and this is why there's so many reports and studies that are contradictory at this point. The most we know about SNP testing is that it makes nutrient deficiencies worse, meaning that if you have a certain SNP, and then you are nutrient deficient in those enzymes, then the consequences of that will be worse. And the consequences of being exposed to toxins, and the consequences of being stressed, and the consequences of having a bad diet are worse in those individuals. But it is not appropriate scientifically to take a SNP test and to say these are the supplements you need. You have to do what we call phenotypic tests. So SNP testing are genome tests, but phenotype tests are things like homocysteine, things like urine and toxic elements, things like blood, urine, amino acids. These are tests that actually show what's happening in your body, not what the potential is through genetics and SNPs. Okay, so that's all I got to say about that. But it's very important that you get that. I think it's going to set personalized and genomic medicine back decades if we continue to run SNP testing and then just say, oh, you have a vitamin D receptor, so you need 10,000 IUs. Absolutely not. That is the worst way of doing it. Okay, so you can actually test for glutathione levels as well. You can test for downstream effects. Obviously, if you have leaky gut, then all of the toxins are going to be worse, and your liver is going to be overloaded. You can do porphyrins. You can look at BOCs and POPs. So these are all the things that you can do. This is a test from Genova, I believe, and these next few slides are all one test that you can get. You can also break it down if you want, but I think it's called the toxic core effect. I'm not associated with Genova, and I've got my opinions about their business practices, but it's a good test nonetheless. So here, this patient has a elevated DDE. That's a pesticide breakdown product, also of DDT. And when I run it, patients have much more than this. This is actually a pretty good patient, but a patient who's been probably, living a cleaner life and taking some supplements. But PCBs are ubiquitous. These are flame retardants, and most people have measurable amounts of PCBs in their blood. So that's something that we test for, and PCBs are in your furniture. A lot of PCBs are in furniture, and PCDBEs are also in furniture. These are flame retardants. PCBs, a lot of these PCBs have been outlawed, but they persist in the environment. Old furniture, old electronics, transformers on electrical poles have PCBs on them, and they all catch a ride. Our electronics sometimes have them, and I'll talk about this later. But having a clean home with not a lot of dust and particulate matter is very important, because these chemicals hitch a ride on particulate matter, and that's how they get into your lungs and bloodstream and skin. So keeping your home clean, not by spraying Lysol clean and not Pine Sol and not over cleaning with chemicals, but simply using air purifiers and cleaning quite a bit is one of the most important things that you can do. Organophosphates, this person had quite a bit. Atrazine is used as a fungicide. It's available over the counter at your Home Depot and your Lowe's, and people use it all the time on their lawns and in their gardens. Here's the phthalates that you can test for, parabens that are used in our beauty products and also in manufacturing of food products. So testing for these can give you a sense of the overload that the patient is experiencing. So a good test doesn't mean you have to start off with that. You can certainly explain the principles of avoiding and eating organic and changing the beauty products and getting a water purifier and things like that. and then test to see if there's anything that's persistent. But if the patient has autoimmune and the patient is experiencing a health crisis, then it might be something that you test for, because then you may want to start more with a liver support protocol for that patient. So I'm going to go pretty quick because we're moving right along, but I still have a lot of slides. We obviously have two major sources, internal, external. We know what our endogenous sources are. Things that, though, you don't really sometimes think about: sarcosine, homocysteine, the kynurenins. Reactive kynurenin is a breakdown product of tryptophan. It's very high in people with autism and depression and neurodegenerative diseases. So, our endogenous sources, though, are mostly due to nutrient deficiency and as well as an overabundance of external toxins. So typically, we don't make enough of these to be a problem unless we have concomitant nutrient deficiencies and or external toxin exposure. Okay. Now, it's starting to become more popular. This is just published a few weeks ago. It's starting to become more of an issue, again, because the science is so robust. And I've always said there's a difference between the medical science and the university science. So the true science that we are doing, and then what gets translated into medical practice, I mean, sometimes there's a 50-year gap in there. But the American Academy of Pediatrics just released their position statement saying that, and that's is it going to change anything? No, but it's a step in the right direction. That they say substantial improvements to the food additives regulatory system are urgently needed. Basically, to get a food additive, the GRAS certification or determination is essentially zero effort on the food industry's part. So they don't really have to. They can just say we did a PubMed search and there isn't any study showing that it's dangerous. Okay, so the FDA then says. And dangerous meaning lethal, not just endocrine disrupting. Again, the FDA does not take that into account most of the time. So, and they recommend retesting all the previously approved chemicals because most of them have never been tested, but they've been given the GRAS recommendation. So regulation and oversight of many food additives is completely inadequate because the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was done decades and decades ago, basically is a conflict of interest in and of itself. It was written by the food and cosmetic and chemical industry to protect their industry. So they go on to say that concern regarding food additives has increased in the past 2 decades, in which authors document endocrine disruption among other adverse health effects. They break it down into direct food additives, such as colorings, flavorings, and chemicals deliberately added to food during processing, not just preservatives, but anything that's listed as flavoring or natural flavoring or artificial flavoring, as well as the substances that we don't think about that the food comes in contact with. So, I mean, my gosh, when you order a pizza, not only are you getting just crap and all the stuff that the animal is eating, and animals eating antidepressants and drugs, and that's in the milk, but then there's a paraffin and phthalate coating to prevent the grease from seeping through, and so you're getting that stuff, and all of the food that's stored in your freezer has a plastic coating around it. And even if it's then your food's wrapped in plastic, that's plastic that's rubbing off onto the food. I mean, that's why if you're eating packaged foods, it's not just the fact that it's processed most likely, but the fact that it's coming into contact with these substances of concern and the plastics and the polymers, and they do create problems. So this is a short list of your indirect food additives. Obviously the bisphenols, which are slowly being phased out, but the things that they're replacing bisphenols like BPA with are not very they're not really any better for you and not any more studied. But the known effects, endocrine disruption, obesogenic activity, so they increase the number of fat cells, neurodevelopmental delay, so autism and ADD and ADHD and lower IQ. The phthalates are in clear plastic food wrap, and we know that those are endocrine disruptors. They also contribute to autism or related to autism. And obesogenic activity and plastic tubing, increased oxidative stress, cardiotoxicity. Again, that's not talked about very much, but these chemicals cause cardiovascular disease or contribute to it because they are in the bloodstream and they damage our vascular system and produce inflammation within the cardiovascular system, which is, of course, the beginnings of atherosclerosis and increased risk of cardiovascular disease. PFCs in the grease-proof paper and the paperboard, again, that's all your pizza boxes, that's all your packaged foods, that's all your freezer foods. That's why you can't recycle. You're not supposed to recycle the cardboard that's in freezer. That frozen food comes in because it has the PFCs, which are even in the cardboard industry are considered contaminants. But we know they cause immunosuppression and cancer and endocrine disruption and, again, obesogenic activity, decreased birth weight. This is the short list. And perchlorates, that's used to be used in rocket fuel, but now it's used in food manufacturing and packaging. And we know that those are potent thyroid hormone disruptors. So when people ask me why are there so many thyroid problems, well, it's the fluorination for sure. We know that. That's a contributing factor. And not just in the water, but in the pesticides. A lot of the pesticides are fluorinated. So we're getting exposed that way as well. But these perchlorates and the chemicals destroy the thyroid, and the thyroid is just one of those canaries in the coal mine, what we call an indicator organ, an organ that's going to be more susceptible to damage than say, your liver at first. So. And then, of course, your nitrites and nitrates, that's just one direct food additive, which is still being used, right? I mean, it's being used in most of your cured meats and it's ubiquitous. So, and we've known for decades how harmful those are. And yes, places, organic won't use that and things like that, but. So we know bisphenols related to, again, obesogenic. That's an obesogen causing insulin receptor dysfunction, causing fat cells to increase, causing cholesterol to increase. Alterations in the timing of puberty, so it's an endocrine disruptor, reduced fertility, impaired neurological and immunological development. And these effects last for generations. So just one hit by a mother during pregnancy will have downstream effects for 3 generations because how it affects that fetus and then how it affects that fetus's eggs or sperm and gonads. So, that's why it's so important to do what we're going to talk about, which is to support our endocrine systems and our detoxification system. Phthalates, again, a robust literature shows that these chemicals adversely affect male sexual development. That's why autism is 4-to-1 because of how the hormones affect the brain male development and how these endocrine disruptors then affect male sexual and neurological development. So, and again, it's an obesogen, contributes to cardiovascular disease. So are you getting depressed yet? So, again, that's not the point of this, but the point is to open our eyes. We have to, sort of swallow the hard pill, pun intended, in order to know what to do. But we have to be able to talk to our patients about this, because if you just say, hey, eat organic, that's not going to do it. You have to have this kind of scientific evidence to back up what you are saying. Perfluoroalkyl chemicals like the perchlorates, again, often added to plastic packages. This was stuff that was used as a rocket fuel. It was a byproduct of rocket fuel, and that's how a lot of the negative side effects were found. So Lots of studies showing that these perchlorates contribute to the increase in neonatal hypothyroidism. So again, this is the transgenerational effect. Most kids are born now with impaired endocrine systems, so it doesn't even take much to destroy their thyroid. And many kids now are being born without a thyroid or with a very low thyroid. So that's on the rise. And again, here's your nitrates and nitrates. That doesn't even look good, right? Subway, eat fresh. That doesn't even look good to me. But that's full of nitrates. But look, I mean, just look at the the ink that's printed on the napkin, the chlorine that's the napkin's made. You get your PFOAs and your phthalates in the plastic wrap. There's been plasticizers found in the bread. It's non-organic meat, so you're getting elevated homocysteine, CRP, antibiotics. I mean, right? It's not a matter of why are we sick. It's a matter of how are we going. How are we still alive, really? So another little thing. Again, I'm trying to increase your awareness from maybe points of view that you weren't aware of before. So I was reminded of this. I like to run, and I'm an athlete, and I bought a shirt at the store, and I took it home, and I just happened to glance at the, it's just one of your, moisture wicking shirts or whatever, and I happened to glance at the tag, and something caught my eye. It said fungicide, and I looked at it, and it's infused with a fungicide. It's just a Nike shirt, and it's actually this is an Under Armour shirt, not to point anything out, but they all use it. It's a zinc pyrrole, pyrethroid essentially, and it's a known carcinogen. And there's clothes that are infused with microban, and microbans everywhere. So you have to avoid anything that says antibacterial, or even the SPF stuff. Those are extremely toxic, and they're embedded in our clothes, and certainly the polyesters. And look, cotton sometimes isn't any better because of the textile industry and what they use to process the cotton. Now, the only safe clothing, in my opinion, and that's been studied, is organic cotton. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of variety in organic cotton. I know companies like Patagonia and Prana, and those places do have organic cotton. So I encourage people to buy that. Look, we have our voice. The only true voice we have in this is our dollar and is our choices that we make. So if we buy more organic sheets and organic, towels and organic clothes, you wouldn't think it makes a big difference, but it absolutely does, not only in the exposure that you get, but also in the industry itself. So this is a study done by Greenpeace in 2014. You can go to Greenpeace and download it. Key findings were they found nonylphenol ethyloxylates, NPEs, were found in 50 of the 82 products. And look, ranging from 1 milligram per kilogram to 17,000 milligrams per kilogram. They found phthalates because that's used in processing in the ink in the shirts, and they found organotins, and again, that's used in the ink. PFCs and PFOAs, swimsuits. It's everywhere. It's not just in kids' clothing, but it's more damaging in kids. But they looked at all of these different apparels and look at the amount of NPEs they found and phthalates. I mean, all the Adidas ones and the phthalates, and antimony here. Antimony is used in the processing of the plastics and the polyester. It's used as a catalyst for making polyester. So look, every single polyester shirt that they tested for had high levels of antimony, which is a known endocrine disruptor carcinogen. So again, I know everybody listening knows about food and knows about air, but I'm even surprised about some of these things. It's even when you think you're doing the right thing, even when you think you're doing everything you can, there's more to learn about even our clothes, not even our detergents, but the clothes we are wearing. So if you do buy some of these, if you can't find organic cotton, if you do buy polyester shirts and things like that, then my recommendation is to wash it with a little bleach the first 2 times. Don't wear it. You want to wash it at least 3 to 4 times. The first one should be bleach, and it should be hot water, and that will help get rid of some of them, some of the toxins, because it does reduce with each wash. Some of these anyway. Some of it, like antimony, is embedded in the actual thread itself, so you can't get rid of it. But if you do buy new clothes, the worst thing to do is to buy a shirt and just stick it on, right? Like if you if you forgot your shirt somewhere and you go to a store and don't just try to wash it at first. Wash it 3 4 times in hot water, bleach the first time, and even hydrogen peroxide. You can do hydrogen peroxide if you don't want to do bleach, but if you do bleach, then wash it at least 2 more times after that. I always use a second rinse on my cycle. And I use clean detergent. I use 100% organic, chemical free, coconut based, no fragrance, nothing, none of that. But I still use a second rinse. So how our clothes, again, it's touching our skin 24/7, and it's a huge source of problems. Health and beauty products, again, Time Magazine. It's interesting, if you go to this website, time.com, and go to this article, I just found it funny. When you click on it, the first thing that comes up is an ad blaring for like Dove soap or some kind of toxic shampoo. I just thought that even when they try to do something, these companies know how to mitigate it, and so you can't even read about this article without being blasted with a advertisement for a toxic beauty product. I just thought that was quite ironic. So if anyone wants to go to that and get a good laugh, that would be worth it. But this is just why I thought this was interesting in 2014, for it just how inept the FDA is at regulating any of this stuff. In 2014, most of the FDA allows companies to self-regulate, essentially. Like, hey, let us know if there's a problem with your product. Yeah, who's going to do that? Oh, yeah, by the way, FDA, come on in. That's asking, you're just inviting the fox into the hen house. Yeah, come on in. We've got a problem with one of our products. So yeah, dig through everything we're doing and tell us what we can and can't do. Well, so that doesn't happen. And which is promoted as a healthier product because it doesn't have, lauryl sulfates in it. The FDA received enough complaints that it decided to investigate, and when it did, it found out that the company itself had received over 21,000 complaints on that one product, and they didn't report it. They just ignored it. And the complaints related to hair loss, scalp problems, itching, and look, it's still, and the FDA didn't even take it off the market either. They're still investigating, quote unquote. So it's crazy what we're exposed to on a daily basis and how inept our government is. In this Harvard study here, the average person exposed to more than 100 chemicals from cosmetic soaps and other personal care products before even leaving the house in the morning. Over 100 chemicals you're exposed to before you even leave the house and get in your toxic car, and and the smelling of the car and the ubiquitous benzenes and exhaust and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and that's before you even get to the office and how toxic the office is, and the mercury lights and all that stuff. So again, this is why it's so important to eat well and to do what you can to mitigate these things. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead. Here's some effects of parabens. And when you go back, when you're listening to this, just pause on some of these because I don't have time to go through all of them, but just pause and please read it. Please read some of these. They're fascinating. But we know parabens are obesogens, are toxic homes. Again, Dust is where most of these things like TDBPP, which are brominated, so fluorinated and brominated, cause a lot of carcinogenicity. Also, children's sleepwear is in that. They looked at many homes, and they found that 66% of homes, or 75% of the homes had banned chlorinated or brominated flame retardants in them. So this is just a quick view of all the sources of toxic chemicals that we get exposed to on a daily basis. Organophosphate, that what they did was they looked at, they went through the home and they just looked at dust. And again, it's the dust that carries these pesticides and herbicides that are used outside your home and also in the food. And the primary metabolite of TPHP was found in 91% of the samples, and another metabolite in 83% of the samples. And this is, just random homes that they went into. One of the biggest things you can do is have a water filter. Again, I don't want to go into all the contaminants of concern, but our water has these chemicals and phthalates and drugs that cannot be removed. The normal process, and the further downstream you live, that's why it was so important that Boulder had a huge problem, and still does. But God, think about, hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks, but think about Dallas, Texas, right? I mean, think about the hundreds of municipalities and towns upstream from Texas, right? Think about California. I mean, the Colorado River starts here, but think about all of the towns, not just in Colorado, but all the farms in New Mexico and Arizona, and then you get Phoenix and how toxic that is. I'm sorry, Southern California, but that's your water, and that none of your municipal water plants remove what is in that water. So that's why you have to have a water filter. It's the number one requirement. Obviously, clean water is the number one requirement for biotransformation and elimination. It is, we forget, but water in organic chemistry is needed for all of our phase 1 and phase 2 reactions to take place. It cannot take place without simple water. Also, it assists in kidney excretion like we talked about before. We lose 2 quarts a day through our skin, so most people are dehydrated, and I recommend a half to 2/3 of an ounce per pound of body weight of clean, filtered, and sometimes electrolyte or mineral fortified. This is the one that I use. The only thing about this one, you can do reverse osmosis, but you have to add your minerals back in or just take a mineral supplement. If you're taking a multi-mineral and multivitamin, you should be fine, and you're eating good foods. But the more inexpensive way to go is just this 10-stage filter that hooks onto your tap. The only thing about this is it doesn't remove very much fluoride. So to do that, I've developed and I made a 2-stage. So I put 2 of these together. In order to remove fluoride, you have to have a very specific filter. And so I combined that filter with this, and I sell it through my office. And if you call, then I will call my office or email my office. The information will be at the end here in a few slides. But I sell it to doctors and stores at wholesale. So you can make you can make some a little profit on that if you want to, or not. I sell it to my patients at wholesale as well. So but it works, and I've had it tested, and it removes 100% of the fluoride. So and Doctor's Data has a good test. You can $100 or less than $100, you can test your tap water for some of that stuff. So here's some cardiovascular effects. Again, even the American Heart Association says particulate matter, and we just had a bunch of forest fires right in the West, and we have an uptick every time the particulate matter goes above 2.5 or above, which penetrates deeply into the lungs, which it does in forest fires. I mean, forest fires, you can get hundreds of parts per million of particulate matter, and what ends up happening is we get an uptick. Statistically, the CDC monitors this, that every time there are forest fires, hundreds of miles away, we get an uptick of heart attacks and strokes just because the air pollution goes up. So it is real. And not only that, but long term, not just acute myocardial infarction and strokes, but long term, it causes lung and cardiovascular atherosclerosis. So this is your ambient particulate matter, causes pulmonary inflammation, which triggers systemic inflammation, much like leaky gut triggers systemic inflammation. It also causes autonomic nervous system imbalance. And again, this is by the American Heart Association here. So one of the things that we do is educate my patients, and I'm educating you on the importance of having an air purifier. It's not just for allergens, it's for these particulate matters. So here we see exposure to particulate matter is associated with increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, increased coagulation. And then if you're obese, you have an even more susceptibility to the adverse effects of particulate matter. So this is the compounding problems in our health systems that you get abnormalities in your liver system and your inflammatory systems, and it makes some of these particulate matters worse. This is just a quick slide on the different type of genes and SNPs that get affected in particulate matter. Here's your metallomatrix proteins that cause cardiovascular disease, BCL2 that causes ischemia and AFib and also cancer. So you can see all of these genes get impaired when we are exposed to these particulate matters, and this is just how it relates to cardiovascular disease, right? All of the inflammation, AFib, and yes, people living in towns or cities, large cities, larger populated areas have more AFib, in large part due to the amount of particulate matter. And then again, if you have your DNA methylation SNPs and you have nutrient deficiencies, then you are more likely to have problems with these chemicals, obviously. So air pollution raises homocysteine as well. Asthma genes and air pollution, people with polymorphism in the GSTP1 and then exposed to these air pollutants, that's why I say don't just run a SNP test and say, oh, you need more glutathione. Yeah, they might, but they definitely do if they're then exposed to these pulmonary toxins and air pollutants and other pollutants as well. So obviously methylrenew, LV, complete glutathione, and selenium, these are things that are absolutely imperative. That's why I take these on a daily basis, because we're all exposed to this stuff and there's no way of getting around it. So I reduce my exposure, but I also take these and I do have some genetic SNPs too that are related to this. I'm personally, I'm homozygous in a couple of the methylation genes. So I absolutely need that, even though my diet is good and my exposure is limited. But raising glutathione naturally is the most important thing you can do with toxins and chronic disease. So we have lots and lots of things that do that, and we just need to use them, and they're not used in significant and therapeutic enough amounts in clinical practice. Let me repeat that again. These things, in my opinion, and in the literature, these things are not used in a significant enough amounts, therapeutic levels, that are going to protect your patients. So you can't just take a couple things here and there and call it good. So taurine is actually really good as an anti-inflammatory. Green tea leaf extract is one of my favorites. It's an antioxidant and improves mitochondrial, and here, cholinergic. So it protects from a lot of these chemicals that we're exposed to. And like the study that I mentioned earlier, these pesticides and insecticides really affect the cholinergic system. So it's imperative that we protect these cholinergic systems. And the EGCG, which is a standardized component of green tea, we have that in the methylrenew. We have that in the LV renew. It is so important, and I'm asked NutriWest to make sure that they get a very clean, very standardized form of the EGCG, which they did. So in all the Renew products that uses the green tea, and really most of their products that uses green tea, they've switched over to this high potency form of green tea. So again, EGCG reduces inflammation in experimental autoimmune encephalomyelitis. And how do they experimentally induce autoimmune encephalitis? Well, they essentially they inject the animal with lipopolysaccharide, which comes from leaky gut, and from some of these plasticizers and phthalates. So all of these studies with green tea, here's your methyl renew with the green tea, and the LV has even higher amounts of the green tea. It also, again, has milk thistle, which increases glutathione in the liver, NAC, which increases glutathione, burdock root and dandelion, which protects the liver and brain and cardiovascular system from the neurological system from the damage. So we've already talked some of this. We only have a few more slides. I know you guys have been great. I know we've gone over a little bit and taking your time, and you guys are hanging in there. And again, this will be recorded because I always go through tons of information. But the neurological effects are real. And these things cross the blood-brain barrier. Again, they get in through the lungs. That's why air purifiers, and I'll get to which one I use here in a second. But people don't realize that is some of the best money you can spend. And yeah, it might be $600, $700, $800 for a good one, but it's absolutely the best money you can spend, in my opinion, for health. We do all these other things, and we miss some of these huge pieces, and then doctors might wonder why their patients aren't getting better, and certainly patients might wonder why they're not getting maybe as good as they can, or I get this a lot. Patients come in and they're really upset. They're new patients, and they're like, I have been healthy my whole life. Why did I get this disease? Well, these are some of the reasons why you get the diseases, because no one educated you on it. So we get immediate and persistent central nervous system responses: the microglial response, the inflammatory response. You get direct transport, but you also get crossing when you breathe it in, the olfactory bulb bypasses the blood-brain barrier, but it all leads to neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, protein aggregation, and neuronal cell death. This is real, folks. That's why, again, it's so important. Folate protects the blood-brain barrier, so it inhibits some of this direct transport. And so if you're folate deficient, obviously, if you have eating a bad diet and you're exposed to wheat and other grains and increased zonulin, obviously you've got a blood-brain barrier issue as well. But just taking folate protects the blood-brain barrier. Again, almost all brain issues have an imbalance of their glutathione levels, and so increasing glutathione through green tea, through folate, through N-acetylcysteine, through lipoic acid is absolutely imperative. And it's interesting, in experimental studies, when they induce, again, like encephalopathy, because it's so easy to induce brain inflammation with these toxins. It's easy to study, therefore it's easy in our individual lives that this is happening because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. But when you pre-treat, again, I travel a lot and I'm exposed to these things, but if I have sufficient levels of N-acetylcysteine in my blood, then that ameliorates and in fact prevents some of the damage by these toxins. So you have to do it before you're exposed, not just after you're exposed. That's the preventative nature of some of these things. Okay, so a lot of these studies show that if we pre-treat with N-acetylcysteine, then the disease that chemical produces doesn't happen, or it happens much, much less, right? So again, lipopolysaccharide, N-acetylcysteine protects from that. That's why NAC is one of my favorite that we use on a daily basis, and it's absolutely imperative in your practice. BP Renew is another one that people misunderstand. So it's got the lipoic acid, which increases glutathione, and it protects your ribosomes and protect more than a lot of other nutrients. It's the lipoic acid that protects your ribosomes and your mitochondria even more than CoQ10. So lipoic acid is very much underutilized in clinical practice. It's not just for reversing insulin resistance and diabetes, but that is one of the mechanisms by which it does that, because it helps protect the cell and reverse the oxidative damage within the cell, so that not only insulin receptor, but also the mitochondria and glucose transport and glutathione production can increase in that cell. And grapeseed extract is extremely important. Magnesium is extremely important for detoxification. That's why we put it in the BP Renew as well. I already talked about taurine and how anti-inflammatory that is. But grapeseed extract is a natural free radical scavenger. It's immune modulating, it's anti-inflammatory, it protects against UV, it's antibacterial, it's great for joints, it prevents breakdown, promotes repair. So I use grapeseed extract a lot in my practice. Again, the lipoic acid, by the way, a lot of people are deficient in lipoic acid because it requires SAMe. So if you've got a methylation defect, then you're not making lipoic acid, de facto. So lipoic acid is great. I've talked also that the great thing about the NutriWest product, they use only the R form, and that's the only one that's bioactive. So the BP Renew has the pure R form. When you get just an alpha lipoic acid from another company, unless it says R, then you're getting a racemic mixture of R and S, and that means only half at best is R. And not only that, but the S form can interfere with the R. So let's say you're getting a 600 milligram alpha lipoic acid product, you're probably actually only getting 100 milligrams of usable, and you're paying more for it. So the BP Renew is the absolute best priced lipoic acid and grapeseed product that I've seen on the market. It's pretty amazing at what it can do. So again, this is the air purifier that I use. It's called the Healthway. It produces no ozone. Remember, ozone is a contaminant in and of itself, and it inflames the lungs, and it can cause neurological damage. So we want an air purifier, and most of the ones on the market produce ozone because it makes the air smell better, but it's actually a contaminant in and of itself. So this one isn't. It's got multiple filters. It's got a filter down here at the bottom that's carbon and zeolite, so that removes VOCs and chemicals. It's got an electrostatic filter that destroys viruses, microbes, molds, pathogens. It's got a HEPA filter that's the highest rated you can get, so it removes all the dusts and particulate matters. And then you can get a chemical sensitivity filter on top that removes even more of the chemicals that might be left over, especially in a high chemical environment like a new home or a new office or planet Earth. So it's the one that I use, and you can call Healthy Indoor Air. If you call them at this number, mention, I don't think Mark actually works there anymore, but ask anybody, or call my office to make sure that you get the $50 off, and you can and it's a great product. It's the only one that I would recommend that you buy. All the others really just almost aren't worth it. So, and here this study shows more than clean air and tranquility, but having a good environment, clean environment, and not a lot of traffic noise actually decreases all-cause mortality. So we do have a lot of studies that show that. All right, just a couple more slides. You guys are hanging in there. You guys are doing good. I just wanted to kind of mention this book because I think it's a worthwhile read. I don't agree with everything he has in there. I don't think his diet is really good. His 8-week detox diet is very good, but I do think it's a great book, and it really opens people's eyes. It's very well researched. It's got a lot of it's written for the doctor and for the layperson. So this is an essential read that I have a lot of my patients read, and I think all doctors should read it. He wrote the Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine, textbook of natural medicine. Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, he's a naturopath who started one of the founders of Bastyr Naturopathic College up there. So he's been doing this a long time, and he's also one that has stated the longer he's been in this, the more he realizes this is one of the primary, if not the primary, in his opinion, cause of chronic health issues. And so, and he has stated most of the things that we went over today, the importance of nutrients and supplements and avoidance and clean air, clean water. But we know he's got a good section on the fact that it's these chemicals that are causing obesity and insulin resistance as well. And again, very low levels of these, thousands of times below EPA levels, still cause receptor shutdown and still causes endocrine disruption. Look, I'm going to repeat that. Levels thousands of times below the dose that regulatory agencies presume causes no effect. And it's interesting because higher doses, you don't have an effect, but sometimes the lower the dose, the worse effect it has because the body can't get rid of it. This is 2 rats that were fed the exact same diet. This fat one was given 1 hit of PFOA, right? 1 exposure to PFOA during gestation, and that is the difference. And that is what we're seeing in our kids. That's why preconception planning is so important. And of course, we know obesity then causes more inflammation. It's that vicious cycle where you get toxin exposure, changes your gene expression, impaired detoxification, more systemic inflammation, you get fatter, and then that adds more toxin exposure, and this is where most people are in this cycle. This is what I was talking about, the synergistic effect of toxins. So you get DDT by itself, and you get PCB by itself, and you get HCBs by themselves, but when you add them together, the effect of your risk of diabetes increases 3, 5, 10-fold in some cases. So it's the synergistic effect that hasn't even been studied. That we're just realizing is the big problem. Again, alpha lipoic acid and grapeseed extract are the 2 things you need to think about in any situation with toxin exposure, and especially someone who's insulin resistant or obese. So here's some of the studies showing just how effective grapeseed is at not only improved metabolic parameters, but improved brain synaptic plasticity as well. And I like grapeseed because it's much easier to absorb than, say, curcumin, which is great too, but grapeseed is often less expensive and just as powerful as curcumin. So green tea, I've got some more on green tea. So I'm going to skip ahead here. LV Renew, we've talked about. I do use the sauna. Sweating is a great way of getting rid of toxins. I use something called Therasana, and here's just a short list of all the neuroendocrine effects, positive effects of far infrared sauna, and here's some references on that. Here's some of my protocols. I've always said this, through exercise and through infrared, if you're not sweating profusely, at least 2 to 3 times a week, you're toxic. You are accumulating toxins. Even if your liver and kidneys and everything else is perfect, we have to sweat. Studies have shown that there are certain toxins that only get excreted through sweat. And heavy metals actually gets excreted through sweat very well. So these prices are, approximate, but you can call, and again, mention me. I try to negotiate prices for my students and for my patients, so that you guys can have these available. So just give them a call or give us a call. And I have done the research for 15 years, and I believe that these guys have the best one available. So. All right, we've talked a little bit about heavy metals. I do have a DMSA protocol. So again, as you're listening to this, or you can call my office and we can give it to you. But you can pause here and only if you listen to my functional medicine series will I give this out as a printout because it's taken me a long time to put together. But you can pause and write this down, take a screenshot, whatever. But this is how we do DMSA and glycine, and this is how we do the challenge protocol. If you don't have DMSA, which is a prescription, if you don't have a nurse practitioner or somebody that can prescribe DMSA for the challenge test or for detoxification, then this is what I use as a provocation protocol without DMSA. So your NAC, BP, you can add total ALAs well to that, complete glutathione, sublingual glutathione, BP renew, also LV renew. That's in the next couple slides. But here's your LV renew right here. So so this is how you can do a protocol challenge test and detoxify heavy metals without DMSA. And I've got the studies to show that it does work. So again, remove the source of these things. That's obviously the most important. Here's my protocol on chelation and detoxification of heavy metals. I do a 7-day off on, 3-day off. Because it does pull out minerals, so you have to have 3 days to kind of replete your minerals, because it's impossible to remove heavy metals without removing some essential minerals as well, because that's how chelators work. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Let me kind of skip ahead here because we're way over time, and you guys deserve gold medals here. But just some more slides on how LV Renew works and the importance of supporting phase 1, phase 2. I will be talking in a couple weeks again on autoimmune disease, and I will go more into depth on the amount of chemicals and xenobiotics and how they trigger autoimmune disease and just why it's such a big trigger. Okay, so if you can make it, please come. Here's your thyroid disrupting chemicals here and some articles that go into that. Here is the slide for my immune talk here, autoimmune talk in a couple weeks. So Saturday, September 22nd and 23rd. Call NutriWest of Texas, okay, at this number here, these two numbers, and they'll hook you up. And I don't know how they're doing it for so cheap. I mean, so $325 or $199 for students. Look, I've gone to seminars that don't cover half this information, and they charge $1,800. You are going to get such a mountain of information in my lectures that I don't know how NutriWest is so generous at making these things affordable, but you're getting a steal. I mean, it's almost embarrassing that they're just giving it away, in my opinion, but that they do it, because they're generous. And also, I'm excited about another seminar I'm doing in October in Tampa, if you're in that area or want to come listen to me. And this one is not in my functional medicine series, so it's kind of a special one, unique one. There are some parts, but I go through the entire gastrointestinal system because gastrointestinal complaints are so rampant. So I go from A to Z, everything from ghrelin and neurological secretion of somatomedin to pancreatic deficiencies, hydrochloric acid deficiencies, how to treat H. pylori, Clostridium. I go into what SIBO really is because most people don't understand what SIBO really is, how to test for it, of course, leaky gut, irritable bowel syndrome, irritable bowel diseases. It's a really fun one because it's so important for our patients and ourselves too. So I also wanted to let everybody know that I've got my functional medicine series courses recorded. Just completed the course up at Portland, and it went really well. It's very well attended. People really liked it. And I went ahead and recorded them. I've had lots of requests to do that. So the 4 main courses are recorded. Covers functional medicine from beginning to end, including blood chemistry, methylation, genetics, laboratory, other laboratory medicine, organic acids, stool testing. We go into autoimmune. We go into endocrinology and adrenals and male and female hormones, and we go into preconception planning and infertility and detoxification. So we cover a very wide array of functional medicine, and it's designed whether you're new to functional medicine and nutritional medicine or you've been practicing it for 15 years, you're gonna get something out of it, and it's designed to take people, from beginning to the end and implementing how to really not just have a successful practice, but how to think critically, how to be a good doctor. There's lots of functional medicine practice managements out there. This course is unique in that it really teaches you how to think about functional medicine, how to treat each person individually, and how to bring your own personality and interest through that. So it's a fun course, and there's actually 5 courses. The fifth one is advanced case studies and advanced applications, and I go into specific case studies from start to end and how I intake a patient and decide which labs to run and how to run them, and how I give that to the patients and come up with treatment plans. So that's it's all there for recording. I've got lots of other recordings as well, 1-hour recordings that you can do. My lab manual is in my order form as well, so feel free to contact me. The email is harmonyhealingcenterpc@comcast.net, or you can call my office, 303-651-1502. Obviously, we'd like you to attend the live seminars. You get better deals. You oftentimes get discounts on the supplements you're going to use in your practice anyway, so it usually pays for itself right there. And there, I always cover things, different things, but new things as I update them. So hopefully you can come to the live seminars. But if you can, and you're listening to this after the seminars in Dallas and in Tampa, then always you can go to the NutriWest website and see where I'm teaching. I'm usually teaching all over the country somewhere coming up, and if not, then we've got these recorded series for you. So I want to thank NutriWest, and I want to thank everybody listening and who attended this. You guys have been great. We've gone over a little bit, but pretty much everybody's hung in there. And I do need to go, but I will see if there's a couple of questions that I can answer here. Again, this is going to be posted, so that's going to be something that you can review and say, hey, what did he say there? Or I want more time with that slide. You can go back and do that. One question is a statement I made that amino acids are extremely important for detoxification. So amino acids are the substrate for our detoxification enzymes. So for instance, glycine, we know glycine, glutamine, and cysteine are essential for glutathione production, and glutathione is the rate limiting step in phase 2. But even our phase 1 cytochrome P450 enzymes need amino acids. So tryptophan, tyrosine, glycine, these are all essential amino acids that are needed for detoxification and repair. So when you run an amino acid test, say through Genova or Doctor's Data or Great Plains, when you see that the amino acids are out of balance, that's a clinical need for some of those amino acids. Now you can do a whey protein, you can do the complete paleo, you can do a general protein supplement, and sometimes that's enough because people just aren't getting enough, they're not absorbing enough of their proteins. Just because they're eating protein doesn't mean they're absorbing. So whey protein is highly absorbable. The complete paleo is highly absorbable with its individual amino acids. So the reason why undenatured whey is more absorbable than denatured whey is because the body actually absorbs di and tripeptides better than single peptides or amino acids. Okay, a single peptide is an amino acid, so it can absorb amino acids for sure, but it's you get more bang for your buck sometimes if you don't have a sensitivity to it to do an undenatured whey protein. And of course, when you eat protein, you got to chew it. That's the number one breakdown of the peptides into di and tripeptides is chewing your food and then supplementing with Lysolife with your trypsin and chymotrypsin and your hypo-D. So that's how you get more amino acids in your diet. But it's actually scary when I run amino acids, how many people are deficient in essential amino acids, even not just being vegan, but just even if they're, eating enough protein because of malabsorption. Um, so yeah, the organic acids and amino acid testing from Genova has that. So someone asked me about the 5G towers and all that. Yeah, I didn't have time to go into electromagnetics, but it's in my functional medicine series. It's in that last class, and I go into because it's another hour or two, and the measures that you have to take. But yes, turning your cell phone off, turning Wi-Fi, not buying a home near a 5G cell tower. These things do work. Sometimes turning off breakers at night, you have to do as well. So that's really important. Someone asked me about catalase. Superoxide dismutase. Those are important because they do get depleted. But the idea is to increase your antioxidants. Your multivitamin, the methyl renew, increase your antioxidants, and that preserve. Selenium. Your trace minerals that help increase your own production of these enzymes, molybdenum. So again, methyl renew. Has most of that to increase your catalase, the LV renew. And then again, if you run a test that looks at your nutrient status, like a SpectraCell, you might be deficient in selenium, you might be deficient in iodine, so then you can supplement with those individual ones that NutriWest has. So the name of the detergent that I use, someone asked me, is Zoom, Z-U-M, and Ecos as well. That's another one that I use. Procter & Gamble bought 7th generation, and they're not as good as they used to be, so I don't use 7th generation anymore. Certainly better than Tide, things like that, but you got to go to your health food stores and buy some of the smaller brands that are better for you. So dishwasher soap, Ecos I think is a good brand, and in terms of ECOS is the brand that I use, and in terms of health and beauty products, so I use a brand called Aubreys, Aubreys, and they have great shampoos and conditioners and beauty products and stuff. There's a couple of others out there that are good too, well, I'd be happy to give you a list, like Acure, ACURE, Organics has some good products. So the key is there's a lot of them out there. You just have to make sure that you're getting the right one, reading the labels. So that's the key. Well, and that's no guarantee because of the FDA rules for the labels. They don't have to. They don't have to really do much, put everything on their label. So if you have a question about high arsenic and high mercury, well, just go back to the slide here on heavy metals and my DMSA challenge. This is how I get rid of heavy metals, my 7-day on, 7-day off. So I think somebody asked me about that. So LV, and again, GB plus is really important when people forget about that, but eating a lot of phyto and greens and fiber and getting your gallbladder going, because that's how it gets excreted, and it prevents enterohepatic recirculation. And then if you want an EDTA, if you can't do DMSA, you can do an over-the-counter suppository called Detoxamin. That's one I use, and that helps as well. So, all right, there's a couple other questions, but I think that's pretty much all we have time for. So, you guys have been awesome as usual, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I really hope that you can can take this information, even if it's just one or two pieces that you learned today, take it, use it, and improve your life, improve your family's life, and improve your patient's life. That's why we do this. That's why we get up in the morning, and it works. Just do everything you can, even little things, like when you're fueling up your car, stand upwind. Go away from it, and don't keep pumping it after it turns itself off, because that releases a lot more benzene and chemicals into the air. So all of these little things, I want to challenge you to just go, okay, how can I limit my exposure? Everything from the clothes you wear and the food you eat and the supplements you take and the air you breathe. I want to challenge you to do everything you can to reduce your exposure and to increase elimination, because it probably is one of the, if not the most important thing that you can do in your life. So again, thank you for your attention. I enjoyed it as always. And until next time, be happy, be prosperous, and be healthy.